I'm going to be making this ring out of tiger's eye. So here's the stone right here. And this is the bezel wire. It's scalloped on the top. So I'm going to start by wrapping the bezel wire around the stone. Once I have the shape of the stone, I'm going to mark off where the ends meet. And then I'm just going to cut that. I'm just checking any extra that needs to be cut off because it's a little big. Next, I'm filing down the ends so that they fit flush together, so when we solder it, the solder can flow nicely across that seam. So this is flux, and it's going to act as a flowing agent, and it's going to protect the metal against any oxidation that's going to happen when we heat it up. So I'm just going to apply this over the crease that we want to solder closed. So now I'm trying to zoom in so you can see the little piece of solder I set on top of the crease. And we're going to begin soldering. So I'm going to start just by introducing the heat to the bezel so it starts to heat up. And I have to be careful because sometimes the flux will pop and move the solder. The solder will flow when the joint is hot. Solder flows at a certain temperature. So I'm just heating it up. And you're gonna see a little bright light when the solder melts right on that crease, and the solder is gonna flow towards the heat. So once that's soldered closed, I'm gonna add it to an acidic solution called pickle. You can see there how there's a silver crease, and this is gonna remove any oxidation from soldering. Keep that in there for about 5 minutes. So now what I'm doing is I'm tracing a shape a tiny bit bigger than the stone out of sheet metal, and this is going to be the back to our bezel. Now I'm cutting out the shape using a jeweler's saw. Once I'm done cutting this, I'm going to remove the bezel we made out of the pickle. So now we have our bezel, and I'm going to shape it around the stone so that it's the right shape when we solder it to the bezel back. So to get ready for soldering those together, I'm just applying flux to the bezel backing that we cut out. Those small silver pieces in there are the solder. I put a few around the edges so it gets around the entire crease. Don't forget your safety glasses. I'm going to turn on the torch and get ready for soldering. So as usual, I'm slowly introducing heat. I'm just going to come in, melt the flux. I'm going to go on the outside so the solder flows out into the crease because it's going to flow towards the heat. Here's the finished piece we just made. I'm gonna pick it up, quench it, and then put it in the pickle. While that's in the pickle, we're gonna work on the band of the ring. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut a piece of tape that corresponds to the size ring I want around the ring mandrel. to lay the tape down and measure out the size of the ring and mark it off. And then I'm going to use my jeweler saw to cut that. Now what we're going to be doing is annealing the ring band, and what this does, it heats it up so that it's easier to bend. And I'm just going to heat it up until it becomes a bright red color. If I go any farther, it's going to melt. Now I'm going to be shaping the ring band around this mandrel using a wooden hammer. In order to get a good solder joint with the ring band and the bezel piece, it needs to be able to sit up straight on the bezel, so I'm just sanding down those ends. So here's the bezel piece that we made. I'm going to be sawing off the corners with a jeweler saw. So right now, after cutting off the corners, I'm sanding down the base of the bezel to meet the edge of the bezel wire. So you can see how the ring band sits nicely on top of the bezel. We're going to apply flux to the bezel, and I also put some on the ring band. Right now I'm cutting my solder, and I'm going to place 2 small pieces right next to the crease where I want it to flow. Now I'm going to begin soldering and heating up the band first and melt that solder into the crease. So I already put this in the pickle for a little bit, so the oxidation is removed, and this is our final piece. So right now I'm using the rotary tool to just start the polishing. Next, I'm going to be using the buffing wheel. I'm going to apply some buffing agent and just run it all around the ring. This wheel is what's going to give it the extra polished look. So now that it's all shiny, I'm going to wipe off the buffing agent because sometimes there's black stuff that sticks to it. Now we're ready to set the stone, so I'm going to push it in there using soft nose pliers. Now I'm using burnishing tools to go around the whole bezel, doing opposite sides so it doesn't come out of place, and I'm just going to push it up and over the stone so it is nice and snug. So the stone is set in place, and this is the final ring. It's really simple.